George, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We're going to ask if you'll make a few opening comments about both what the day in the life of an assistant to the president is like, maybe a little bit on your duties when you were director of White House Public Liaison, and we'll go to questions. Thank you.
I want to thank you for this incredible honor and privilege. What an amazing impact you're having on students across America. I'm so honored to be with you all today. And I thought first I wanted to just go through what is it to be an assistant to the president? What do the roles look like in the White House, specifically relating to assistant to the president, deputy assistant to the president, and as a special assistant to the president. Those are the three tiers of roles, including the chief of staff, who serves as an assistant to the president. So I, in the first Trump administration, served as the director of the Office of Public Liaison and assistant to the president. This role as assistant to the president is the highest ranking staff position within the White House. Individuals in this role are typically senior advisors who work closely with the president on a broad range of issues, providing both strategic counsel and overseeing major initiatives. You then have the deputy assistant to the president, whose role serves as the next level tier, which is individuals supporting assistants to the president. In this role, they often manage specific portfolios or policy areas, ensuring that the president's agenda is implemented across various departments and agencies. And then you have the next tier, which is special assistants to the president, which includes individuals who handle more specialized tasks or focus on particular issues. They provide both targeted support and research in addition to assistance in development and execution of specific policies or project. Now, the idea is that there's no set number of these roles. So any administration can decide, well, we'll have, typically in the first Trump administration at the beginning, we had approximately 24 assistants to the president, for example, and a similar number of deputies and special assistants to the president. It varies, and that allows for the president and or the chief of staff to have maximum flexibility to be able to structure the White House organizationally as they see fit at that moment. So it depends on what it is that they want to accomplish and what specific policy areas are part of that. But that's an important element to understand as you're looking at these specific roles within any White House.
Well, thank you. And we just are so excited to have you today. And before we go to questions, would you want to talk just a little bit more about what the director of public liaison, White House Public Liaison, does? Because that was your specific responsibility in the White House as assistant to the president.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's the greatest honor and privilege to serve your nation and the president of the United States, who you serve at the pleasure of. And I think I start by saying, for those that have served, are serving, or will serve in the future, the biggest honor is that. And to remember that you're serving at the pleasure of the president of the United States. I had an incredible opportunity to serve as President Trump's first director of the Office of Public Liaison and set that first office up, and had the most incredible experience than anyone could ever have. From a day-to-day perspective, I was able to hire folks for key roles across all of the various subject areas, meaning business, faith-based, NGO, whatever the specific silo is in terms of engagement. We had someone representing that element to make sure that what we called the Office of Public Liaison was the front door of the White House. So as the front door of the White House, it is where folks come in to engage. It is where folks come in to tell their story. It is where companies come in to express what they're happy about and maybe what they're concerned about. And same thing for organizations across the spectrum, to be able to say, we want to have our issue heard. And what our office would do is then connect the dots. not only in the White House, but across government to say, okay, you have an issue here. Let's connect you with that specific organization within whatever element of government that would be. And so for me personally and professionally, to be able to serve President Trump at that time, to be able to serve the nation, to be able to help to accomplish so many things. In my case, it was big role that I played was in tax reform with listening sessions. And that goes to my point on, listening. And I think that's the role of the Office of Public Liaison, is to be able to listen and to connect those dots. And for me, again, having the honor and privilege of working with so many dedicated individuals, you're working at a level that is indescribable, where you're working from 6 or 7 a.m. to 11 or midnight or later every single day. The White House never closes. It's never on vacation. So it's unlike anything certainly I've ever experienced, but the privilege of a lifetime.
Well, thank you. And I know we've got lots of questions. And Janine, do you want me to go to you next, or shall I go to Joel? Jewel, I'm going to go ahead and jump to you, and we're going to let you lead it off.
I'm here. I couldn't get my mute button to unmute. I'm sorry. I was like frantically hitting the unmute button. It's wonderful to be here today. And thank you for joining us as well. I'm trying to get my screen on a different gallery view. There we go. Sorry, I'm off camera today. I'm out. So George, thanks for being with us today. And I just want to, for our students listening and whatnot, narrow it down for us, like a day in your life. You say people come to the White House because they want to be heard. Who is that? I mean, most citizens think, well, I can't just walk into the White House. I can't call the White House and have an appointment, and I can go see my representative, who's in my district. But when you say people come to the White House and sit down, they want to be heard. Why are they going to the White House instead of going to their representative, first of all? And secondly, who is the quote unquote people that can actually get into the White House? Who's coming to the White House, I guess, is my first question.
Yeah. So great question. It's a super question. And of course we have, the division of government between, executive branch, legislative and judicial. And so we're talking about the executive branch in this instance, right? So who comes to the White House? Well, if it's a day where you're hosting an event for a specific organization, let's narrow it down to a few different days so I can give you a couple different examples. If it's the Taoiseach coming from Ireland and it's St. Patrick's Day, and you're having a high-level leader coming into the White House, in addition to everyday citizens coming in that are invited and maybe through their community are invited. Same thing, I'm very familiar with Greek Independence Day, where the Greek Orthodox Archbishop comes in and so many members of the community come in as well to engage. And that may also include some meetings that they may request. On a different day, every day is different in the White House, right? So if there's a switchboard and there's the ability to call in and there's the ability to figure out which office you're trying to connect with. If it's an issue that is top of mind for that day or for that week or for that month, certainly there are more meetings taking place on that. And the White House will either proactively reach out to individuals and organizations, or in the obverse, individuals and organizations will reach out to the White House to try to get their voice heard. Clearly, not every meeting can take place, but there's an opportunity to submit through email, etc., letters and correspondence. And there's a correspondence office in the White House that responds to these types of letters, etc. So it's an incredible opportunity to see such a varied day-to-day engagement, whether it's one organization coming in for recognizing teachers or student organizations. You name it, you name the type of organization, they're engaging with the White House. So it's across the entire spectrum of who would be engaging with any specific White House.
And why would they go? Why I never really knew that. Well, I mean, I always heard that in back in the day, you know, that Thomas Jefferson would open the door of the White House with his robe on. You know what I mean? Or George
Right.
Washington, or whoever
Yeah.
managed to get there. They were
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson, I think was. They're like, yeah, come on in. But I didn't, with all the security and whatnot, I didn't know that average citizens or groups would just call the White House and say, we want a meeting. And when you say they come into the White, so this is like a three-pronged question. When you say they come into the White House, are they going to the Eisenhower offices? Where in the White House are they going? Is it for one of those press conference rooms, and then they have meetings? Where are those meetings? And when the people come, is it usually kind of just in groups, like to celebrate the, you know, Greek national this or Irish national that? And do you have to be invited? And then my other question is, why would you recommend someone call the White House? And when you say the White House, what does that mean? I mean, if they call the switchboard, who do they even, there are like 100 different rooms. For whom would they even ask? And why would you recommend someone call the White House instead of their representative? What are they going to get that's different?
Well, that's a really good question, right? So you have your representative. That's who most people reach out to. But we do have the executive branch and we have the judicial branch. So as I mentioned, like the White House is another platform. It's another part of government that does engage with organizations and individuals, and we see it every day. And so, sure, you have your elected representatives that you can go visit in Washington, but there are opportunities to engage with the executive branch as well. That's the overarching component here, because of the separation of powers. Now, from a security standpoint, can you just walk up and walk into the White House? No, you cannot. It's very difficult to enter in even any of the executive branch agencies. And, you know, you would even argue that today it's a little bit harder to get into the Congress, but not impossible. You can still walk in to visit with your elected representatives. So that's obviously, for most folks, the first point of engagement. But the point here is there is engagement with the executive branch. That does take place. Why would you do it? It just depends. Are you trying to, you know, get a message through to, you know, it's a governor's office and they're trying to engage, for example, with cabinet affairs, or it's a, an elected representative in the state that wants to come in and speak on behalf of their representatives, or you're an NGO leader who has an issue that you want to make sure is brought forth on the executive branch side, or you're trying to reach the Department of Education or the Department of Labor or any other organization within the government, and you're trying to figure out how, so you're trying to engage the White House to get your message through. People want to be heard, right? And that's the whole point of our office and for public liaison, organized around issues, was such a help. And we saw organizations and individuals, you know, being heard. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's synonymous to what happens in the Congress. I mean, people go in to be heard, but there's different reasons. Everybody has a different reason. Organizations have a different reason as to why they would want to be heard. But you could just look at the headlines every day and say, well, maybe that should be something that the White House should be aware of, or you know, the Congress, or, you know, whatever agency that is. So it's really an incredible honor and a privilege to be sitting in that role, to be able to hear from organizations and even companies, you know, where there's a forum to be heard, like we have an issue. And it's sort of
when an individual calls, or you mean, is it Nancy Sue from, you know, Hillsborough, Tennessee is calling, or are these individuals that are president? Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. It just depends. Like if it's, if you're calling into the White House, clearly there's a time and a place for meetings, right? And we tried to accommodate as many meetings as possible when I was in that office. If we received a call, or to answer, or to get correspondence back, or to ask someone submit your request on what your issue is, and we'll try to get someone to answer it appropriately from that specific expertise, which is really important, right? And it goes back to the same way the Congress works is citizens write in or they email in or they call in and they want to be heard, and they hope for an answer. And that's sort of the way the whole system works here. But it's an incredible layer of government, especially as you see with transitions, having been through 2 presidential transitions. It's also incredible to see how we have a transfer of government, a peaceful transfer of government, and to see how, the main offices continue to engage across the board, like I mentioned, public liaison and cabinet affairs, and all coming down from the chief of staff's direction.
Right. How do you, and I have limited time, I have to toss to my fellow host, but how do you decide which person you're just going to send a letter like thank you so much for calling, and which person you're going to have come in and have a meeting? And then when you have the meeting, is it at the White House or is it the Eisenhower
Oh
building?
yeah,
I mean,
no,
just
yeah,
'cause
that's
you
that
go to
question.
the
Yeah,
White House.
yeah. It depends. It depends. Again, the issues. There's so many issues. Start with that. There's so many issues. So if you're getting calls or emails on a specific issue, clearly you're able to reply, across the board with a blanket answer if you have that answer, or to refer individuals and organizations back to who was trying to formulate that answer. Meetings take place all across the White House. They take place all across the White House, and they take place all across the old executive office building, the Eisenhower building. So it depends on what the meeting is. Is it a small meeting? Is it for the, recognizing, like I mentioned, teachers or students, or there's various venues within the old executive office building and in the White House for those types of engagements.
Yeah, this is enlightening, really enlightening. We focus so much on the other branch of government, and I just never really thought you could call the White House like that. Well, we could talk about there are just, as you say, a lot of issues and a lot of variants of type of questions we could ask here. But I have to toss to Jewel probably now. So thank you, George,
Awesome.
so much. Thanks for your service to the country.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I am an actress, so I know those 12-hour, 14, 16-hour days,
Thank you so
and
much. Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate
Okay,
your
I'm gonna
service
talk.
too. All the work you've done. Incredible.
Oh, thank you. We try to make a difference. That's what I guess we, wake up every day. What's the purpose? Let me try to be of service. So
That's right.
thank
That's
you.
right.
Thank you. Okay, toss
so
in here.
much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hello, this is Jewel Gilbert, and thank you so much. We have been learning about the world of White House assistants, and many of us did not even think about this critical position, really, and also very exciting position. So I may be going backwards a bit in the discussion. If so, I apologize. But since don't have a big frame of reference for it, it can't hurt to get some more information. So what are some examples of a task that an assistant may carry out?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question, and thank you for asking. The tasks range. You're asked to coordinate a meeting. You're asked to help put together an event. You're asked for advice on how to bring organizations together. There's the day-to-day changes. It's fluid. It depends on what's happening around the world, in Washington and across the board. So the constant is that you're constantly moving. There's never a moment of rest, literally, because there's just so much going on always. And I think it's important to note that, again, the White House never closes. It's open 24/7. It's functioning, and you have everything from the Situation Room. You have all of these layers of folks that are working on specific issues. So you have an opportunity to say, well, today is going to be busy. That's for sure. There's a lot of meetings that take place. There's a lot of research that takes place. And in between, you're trying to make sure that you're staying focused on why you're there. You're serving at the pleasure of the president and for the American people and our great nation. And if that's your North Star, it makes your day really easy because you're always focused on that, trying to do the right thing and trying to work as hard as you possibly can at the highest possible level you've ever worked in your life.
It's awesome. It sounds a little bit. It sounds like sports almost. So it must be invigorating to be on a team like that,
Yeah,
especially
that's
being.
a good analogy. Yeah, thank you. That's really cool. That's true.
Um, do assistants need security clearances? Do they need what is that part of it like? Because I mean, you're in the White House.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's so many layers of security, especially today, more than ever around the White House, around Washington. You see it everywhere. Yes, the FBI does a background check on all individuals that work in the White House. And that is something that is done for folks that work in the White House, and you have a background check done. And based on the background check, you are allowed to work in the White House. And I think that's, the same for Department of Defense and many other elements of government, FBI, CIA, et cetera. So I think there's no lack of scrutiny of individuals that are working in and around the president and around the White House and all of its branches.
Yeah, it's got to be it's a high trust position, really, being an assistant in the White House. How do most assistants enter the administration?
It's not a straight line. That's a really great question. It depends. It depends on your expertise. It depends on where you were prior to. Some people come in to the White House having been familiar to a presidential candidate through a campaign. Others come in that have worked in policy areas that are necessary for a specific White House. Others may be familiar to folks that are coming into the White House. And so there's various paths that people take. And I wouldn't say there's one straight line that says, hey, if you do all of this, you'll become, a White House staffer. It just depends. Obviously, if you're involved in politics, if you're involved in campaigns, the likelihood rises, but you still also need some type of expertise, no matter what that is. So there's several different levels affiliated with that, right? So it's kind of it's another great question because there's, my gosh, where do you begin?
Yeah, so then do different assistants have different areas of expertise, and then do they have different access to the president or different officials? How are I guess, are the assistants brought in for particular things, or is that after you're brought in that you maybe go where your strengths lie?
No, you're brought in typically for what your background is. For example, White House counsel's office will be attorneys, right? You should be an attorney, and you should be someone with specific expertise across the board in terms of whatever element that you're in. If you're in, mentioned earlier, like the Office of Public Liaison, if you have within that office, the business liaison, you've probably had some experience working with the business community, and therefore it's helpful. It's a little bit more difficult if you didn't have that experience, although that could happen. You could end up, in a role where you really didn't have a lot of experience, but you were a trusted advisor or worked really hard on a campaign or whatever it may be. Because let's not forget, this is the result of politics, right? So, every presidential campaign has so many folks that work on the campaign. There's only so many jobs available and roles. And so, but I'd say most of the time, folks with specific background will end up in a specific role that is most in line with what the president needs in order for for his priorities or her priorities to be successful.
Is there? I know that, like you had described, and as I had kind of heard, it sounded like it was similar to my experience in college football. It's like your whole life revolves around everything that it takes to achieve this goal. But you're not quite like it is in the military. But you still have so many hours a day, and where everything else you do still revolves around that too. And if you believe in the mission, then it is it's the yoke is light. The yoke is light in a way, but you're still yoked. Is there burnout among the assistants? Is it a year term? Is it a 4 year like job, or is it and do people end up needing to exit early if it's just too much for them?
You know what? Another great question. First of all, I love your football analogy. Having come off of the Super Bowl, regardless of whether you liked one of the teams or not, I think, it's the ultimate game, right? It's the Super Bowl is the pinnacle of it all. I think it's a great analogy to the White House. I mean, it's the highest level of government. It's, within the executive branch, you have really, just an incredible perspective from where that is. And you have to be, when you're in that role, as whether you're assistant to the president, deputy assistant to the president, special assistant to the president, whatever it is, you have to be always thinking, look, I'm part of this team. It's never about you, right? It can't be about you. It has to be, and again, I know I've said this a lot, but you're serving at the pleasure of the president. You're not there because of just, you may have the expertise, you may have all of that, but it's not about you. And so it's just like a football team. It's not just about one player, right? It's a team sport. And so I love what you said about that, because the analogy is so aligned with that. It's if the team's not functioning as a team, and it's, you have folks that have individual agendas, it's harder, right? So I think the beauty of what happens in a new White House and an existing White House as it goes on, how many years? Look, it says, well, how much endurance do you have? How long can you play in the NFL? If you take care of yourself and you try to mitigate injuries, you're going to last for a while. I think Tom Brady did a pretty good job. But it's pacing yourself. It's a commitment. And for a lot of the folks that have families, it's hard. It's hard to dedicate so much time, but the reward is great. And it's personally the greatest reward that you could ever have, akin to serving your nation in any other level, clearly. So it's just an honor.
And my last question, kind of a follow up on the flip side, is how do you leave that service and go back into something else? Even if it's like a corporate job or hopefully something else mission based. How do you leave that? What would it be like to leave that world and go into something that usually would be less vigorous?
Yeah. There are different, again, it's sort of like you're playing on a football team and now you're doing something else. You go to the business world, or you work for an organization. It's different. But here's the thing. Now, what I've come to find is that, you can impact the world, the country, your community, whether you're inside the White House or whether you're living in a city and you're trying to do good things. So I think there's ways to serve that don't just include a title, if that makes sense. It is an incredible honor. It's the most incredible. I had personally the most incredible experience that anyone could ever have serving as the Director of Public Liaison. And I wouldn't change it. I'd do it all over again. And but you can change the world and you can impact the world from the outside of the White House too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Thank
Interview
you.
on my side and pass it on to Wyatt
Awesome.
here.
Thank you so much.
Got it.
Yes, Wyatt Inslee here. Thank you so much for being here today. This is all just fascinating. I mean, to be truly honest, I really didn't know all the staff, the large amount of staff members that the president has. Whenever you think of the White House, you just usually think of the president, maybe the chief of staff, but So this is just really all fascinating. So thank you for being here and discussing this with us.
Of
So
course.
one of my first questions was, what advice did you receive? And did you receive any from your predecessors, or what did they tell you about?
For that role specifically, I had a great privilege of having my predecessors, reach out to me when I first went into the role and give me advice on what they found to be successful and what they found to be challenging, and really just welcome me to the Office of Public Liaison community, which is, something that it's a special role within the White House and serving the president in that capacity. So advice, um, was things like, you're going to work really hard. Be prepared. Well, I sort of recognize that. But perhaps one of the things that I tried to think about this every day as I crossed into the gates of the White House proper, was to just remember why I was there. Every moment, every day, every second, to appreciate it. And when you do that, your day is a little bit different. When you think about it in terms of, this is a privilege, it's just a different perspective, and it allows for you to really be willing and able to go that extra mile. Again, like the football analogy we had earlier, when you're on the team, if it's about the team and you feel like you're a privileged part of that team, it's an honor to be part of that team, you're going to work harder. It just is what it is. And I think just remembering that every day is critical.
Yeah, clearly you have a lot of gratitude for the position that you had. So, what was that first day like whenever you walked in? Were you feeling? Were you nervous? Were you thinking, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm about to, I'm serving at the White House for the president." What was going through your mind?
Another That's a really great question. And what's funny is, I remember it like it was today. I remember, there were several of us that were shuttled over in a van through the White House gates. And I remember, just sitting in the van, and just the gates are opening to the White House, and you say, oh my gosh, this is like real, like it's really happening. And, to be part of that, moment, to understand the gravity of what it is that you're about to do, what you're doing, and who you're serving, is incredible. I mean, it's just, there's no parallel that I've experienced in terms of the gravity of it all. And that first day was extraordinary. And you show up, and beginning of an administration, a transition, everybody's trying to figure out, everybody's going through the same thing. So that's also a very unique moment in time, just like what we just experienced. It's a unique moment in time when you have this transition, you have new folks coming in, everybody's feeling what you're feeling at that moment. Everybody, maybe some people have done it before, but it's still incredible. It doesn't matter how many times you've been in the White House, it's still incredible. And to be able to witness that your first day, to try to figure out, okay, my office, my computer, what are the processes here? And then it accelerates from there very quickly. So just incredible, awe-inspiring, I think would be the way that I describe it.
Yeah, I can only imagine that sense of feeling, especially when you're literally talking about the gates opening to the White House. That would be just awesome to be there. So what are some common misconceptions do you think some might have about your role as being a assistant to the president, and maybe some of the tasks that you do?
Um, I think to your point earlier, it's the White House structure changes from administration to administration. Even within an administration, you could have changes in the reporting structure, et cetera. I was fortunate enough to report to the chief of staff, Reince Priebus at the time, and had an incredible relationship with the chief of staff, and all the way up to the president and all the assistants to the president. I think you know, it's again, the day to day, the moments that you're encountering, the process, standing in the Oval Office or in the Roosevelt Room in the White House. I mean, at any moment, you're just incredibly inspired to think about the long and incredible history of the United States of America. And again, the privilege that you have to be standing there in that hallowed ground of the White House it's just profound.
Wow. Yeah. What are some big takeaways from your time at the White House that you took away with some of the lessons that you learned?
Well, I think one of the lessons I've learned is there are some incredible people working to make this country incredible every single day across the board, in every industry and every facet of day to day. And you see that at the White House because it's the intersection, right? Everyone's trying, you know, especially organizations, companies, individuals, et cetera, are trying to get their message heard, as we talked about earlier. And when you understand the role that the White House plays in that, and then you juxtapose that upon the entire process with you know, the Congress and then with the judicial branch, you understand that this is truly the most amazing country on the planet. And the lessons learned, I mean, that's the lesson. The lesson is that we are fortunate to be in the United States, to be in the greatest country in the world, and you know, having served in that role, you know, everybody looks to the United States for guidance across the world. So it's just overwhelming when you think about it all.
Yeah, very, very true. So probably one of my last questions, what advice would you give to those who will be serving as president assistants to the presidents or similar positions that you are in?
Yeah, at any level, serving in the White House or executive branch, et cetera. I mean, in any role like that, I mean, just pace yourself to always keep that North Star while you're there. You're serving at the pleasure of the president, and you're a part of a team. And if you have that perspective, you're going to do great things.
Wow, yeah. Well, I will hand it back over. Thank you so much for the amazing answers and just incredible stuff that you've been telling us about. So thank you.
Thank you, Wyatt. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Wyatt and Jewel and Janine. Great questions today. And George, we're just so fortunate to have you. We have a lot of audience questions. And before we go to the audience questions, we want to recognize the teachers who are watching with students today. And we have, let's see, we have Professor Tokarov from watching with Northwood University students. We have Chatali Bavi, who is watching with students. And we have Sharon and Connor Cummings, who are watching as students as well. And we also want to thank Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM on the radio dial. Las Vegas's KKVV airs these chats every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. So thank you to our listeners in Las Vegas for listening to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. So going to questions, George, we have got listener Vicky who has emailed in a question, and she said that she didn't name who, but she said she had a friend who served in one of the administrations as assistant to the president and staff secretary. And she thought it might be interesting to tell a little bit about what the role of staff secretary is. What does that person do? Because it sounds like it's a lot more than what you might think that a normal secretary would do.
Yeah, staff secretary. My understanding with the staff secretary is that they help with all of the official documentation and everything that comes across the president's desk typically goes through the staff secretary's office and through the staff secretary. So you're right. It's a very, very important role. I think the title is a little bit misleading as staff secretary, but it is, if when you look at it, it denotes at that level the importance of all of the initiatives that come across a president's desk, including the commission. So when you're part of the White House staff, senior staff, et cetera, you receive what's called a commission, and you're a commissioned officer. That's something I didn't mention earlier. And you get a certificate, a giant certificate signed by the president. And that commission is, is completed through the staff secretary's office, for example. So it's an incredible role. And what a privilege to know someone that served as staff secretary. It's incredible.
And then Tracy asks if any of the assistants to the president are required to be confirmed by the Senate.
That's a great question. And the answer is no, they do not. No,
Okay.
they're not. They serve at the pleasure directly of the president on his staff in the White House.
Okay. And then Richard MacArthur asks, are presidential assistants directed, or assistants to the president, or assistants to the president, and probably really director of public liaison, directed how to respond to calls and other communications from outsiders based on friendliness or hostility to the president or his agenda?
It just depends on the issue and what the issue is of that week, month, year, and where it is in terms of priority for that moment based on availability and context. So it's not a straight line in terms of, who can go in and have a meeting, et cetera. Any organization, company, et cetera, can request a meeting. And who actually we're able to meet with just depends on time and the relevance to that moment. So it has to be, the stars have to align in a sense for being able to accommodate, so many meetings, which is why most folks go to their representative in the Congress first, to be able to be heard directly, and then also articulate their message in whatever way they can to the White House.
That's great. And then Virginia Donovan had a good point when we were talking about why would you go to maybe directly to the White House instead of your congressional representative. And Virginia said, what if you have congressional representation that does not align with your views? Virginia says she lives in Maryland. And so then she said, how would she get a concern to the executive branch if maybe her member of Congress wasn't willing to? So I think what we were saying earlier is she could try calling the switchboard directly if she wanted to, or putting in an email.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and candidly, I think most representatives in the Congress will note, regardless of whether they're for or in support of or not in support of a specific issue, will take note of what that is. And they do interface with the White House through congressional affairs in the White House. So if it's a significant and very, time-sensitive issue, that can be brought forth through their representative as well. So it's a great question.
And then you may have addressed this a little bit, but Julianne Smith asked, what was your background that positioned you for being the assistant to the president and director of public liaison for the White House? That's
a great question. I've been in Washington for 25 years now. Back in 2001, I worked for President Bush, George W. Bush, for his first term. I managed economic development initiatives and also served as an advanced representative, as an advanced person as well for the president and first lady. And subsequent to that, built a network, engaged with organizations, et cetera. So for another decade plus, I was engaged with the business community and NGOs, et cetera. So I had a unique background, which allowed me to have engagement with these types of groups, which is what the Office of Public Liaison actually does. So in my case, my background and experience was directly in line with serving as director of the Office of Public Liaison, because that's sort of what I did from the outside of the White House. I engaged with groups and brought organizations and companies together. So it was candidly not a difficult transition because I already knew how to bring organizations and individuals together. So really great question.
Well, thank you. And then one of our student listeners has a question, and she says, "My name is Kian, and I'm 11 years old. What is your plan to do after this amazing job? Do you sign an agreement to keep all the secrets secret until your last day?"
That's a really great question. Well, my personal view on that is I will never write a book. I believe that you're entrusted, in my case, by President Bush and President Trump, with an incredible honor, having served in their in their administrations in the White House, and I feel like you do not necessarily sign an agreement, but you have a security clearance, and there's a background check done on you for a reason, because you are you're holding, in confidence, the role that you've been entrusted with. And so I find that to be part of the honor that you're bestowed upon in serving at the pleasure of the president. You're not serving at the pleasure of yourself. So therefore, they're not items that you should disclose. I mean, if something's public, sure, you can talk about it, but if there's any conversation or anything like that, it's confidential. It's confidential to that moment. And it's in fairness to the president and to the nation to keep that confidential, because you've been entrusted with that role and you're serving at their pleasure.
Well, thank you. That's very admirable. And we have another student. We have Vachi, who's 9 years old, and asks, "Can you work for more than one president?"
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And there are many folks that have. I worked for President Bush and President Trump, and you can. So you can, and it's it's a double honor or a triple honor, or how many times you're afforded that incredible privilege. But yes, you can, and it's somewhat common. Typically, you serve the same party that you worked for, although sometimes sometimes folks work across different administrations depending on their background, et cetera.
Well, thank you. And then Terrence Durbin says, "Does Congress approve funds to pay salaries of the president's staff?"
Yeah, I believe the way it works is that the Congress appropriates funding for the White House operations for the executive branch. Mm-hmm. So
And then it would be probably up to the discretion of the president and the chief of staff to decide. And aren't there certain pay ranges for various levels of the?
There are, yes, there are different ranges, and it depends, and it's at the discretion of that specific chief of staff and White House in terms of what those ranges will be. There's a maximum. During my time, I believe it was $179,000 a year. So there's a maximum amount, but they can adjust within the White House to meet the budget overall. If you want, 40 members of the assistant to the president outreach, then you need to maybe limit the amount that each is paid so that you have the amount of budget left. So that's, again, at the discretion of the specific administration.
Thank you. And then we've got one of our listeners who's had experience herself. She, let's see, what does she say? This is Teresa Speak, who served in the Bush administration. And Teresa says, I had two questions here. "Kathy, my friend Jennifer Korn served as deputy director and special assistant to President Trump in his first term and has just been appointed again to be deputy assistant and faith director. Teresa says she's had access to many White House events through her friend Jennifer Korn. That brings up a good question. And George, I don't know if you know, but I think they just announced that an Office of Faith is going to be established again in this second administration of President Trump. Could you tell a little bit about what that the Office of Faith does?
Yeah, so let's see. And so Jennifer Korn actually worked in the Office of Public Liaison when I was there, so I know Jennifer well, and she's now serving as the faith director. of the White House Faith Office, and the senior advisor for that is Paula White Kane. That was a recent announcement. Basically, what my understanding is, the White House Faith Office will be engaging faith-based leaders and organizations so that they have, it's similar to across the board for the Office of Public Liaison, an engagement point, so that the various faiths, any faith, can come in and, you know, have their issue heard, or to engage, or to support, or to advise, or, you know, whatever element that is, depending on the issue. So it's just another way to have someone dedicated to the faith communities across the country, to know that, you know, there's a director of faith-based initiatives, and in this case, it's Jennifer Korn. So that's fantastic news, and I know she's going to do incredible there, because she did it for the Office of Public Liaison as well. So she's
Well, thank
experienced.
you.
Yep.
And then we have an audience member who says, I applaud you for not going the personal route and respecting the office and clearance. Thank you. So that's
Very
it's always
nice.
nice
Thank
to get positive comments here. And finally, I think this is a great question to close out on. Julianne Smith says, if you had to choose your best day, what made it great? And what is your most fond memory of that opportunity?
You know, that's really, it's a very, very hard question, for the simple reason that truly every day was just, you know, awe-inspiring. I mean, clearly there's a lot of stress involved in working in the White House, because when you care, you have stress. When you want things to go well, you have stress, right? So if you don't have stress, something's not quite right with the situation. You need to be, you know, focused on at that optimal level. There were so many days. I think back to so many of the days that, gosh, you know, tax reform listening sessions, I'd say, you know, for me, were incredible. Harley Davidson in those first early days, coming in to meet with the president, their CEO, and talking about how their company does in the US or overseas, and, you know, witnessing, you know, those moments. The truckers who came in and talked about how important their industry is across the nation, the number one job title in every state, pretty much. So these are the things that there's just so many, but what stands out to me is the reaction, the excitement, the enthusiasm, just the inspiration that people had when they came in, small business owners, when they were, you know, came in to talk about their business, and had, you know, it didn't have to be the meeting with the president. It could be meeting with my office, but they were so excited to just tell their story. And here's what would help. Here's what would help my business in my community to do better. You know, that simple little thing is what stuck with me, is that the ability to hear and to serve as a sounding board, and hopefully to connect those dots and to make a difference. That's ultimately why you're there.
Well, it sounds like your answer then is every day was your best day.
That's right. Thank you. It's true. It's true.
We're right at the top of the hour. We want to thank everybody who tuned in today. We want to thank you for all the questions. We especially want to thank our students for their great questions. And we want to invite our audience to come back next week, because we are going to be celebrating George Washington's birthday with a very special show. Author Edward J. Larson. He is the Pepperdine University Professor of History at Pepperdine, and he has written a book, The Return of George Washington, Uniting the States, 1783 to 1789. So he's going to be covering the period in George Washington's life right after victory with the Revolutionary War, all the way through presiding over the Constitutional Convention, and right up until he's sworn in as the first president of the United States, which is a fascinating period of George Washington's life. So we hope you'll all come back next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And George, thank you so much. And we want to, let me let you just give you a chance real fast to give a shout out one more time to your podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Catalyze Podcast, ideagenglobal.com, and capitalcounsel.com if anyone wants to take a look and see the great work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Janine?
George. It's Janine. Yes, Janine. Thank you, George, so much. Thank you, Jewel,
Janine,
Jordan, and
thank
Wyatt.
you. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
y'all.
What an incredible interview.